All right. Hey, Paul.
Hey Fab, how are you?
I'm doing great. Yourself?
I'm good. Yeah, it's good. It's actually warming up. It sort of feels like spring out there.
It's
Uh,
February. Let's not get carried away.
I walk to work. Well, it's
Nice.
above freezing, which is the first time in like a month.
That's nice. Awesome. So
But
interesting
yeah,
topic today. Oh
I
yeah,
feel like
Marvel
it's
Comics.
here.
There you go. For anybody just listening in, Paul just showcased his superhero Marvel
I
Comics
show you my other mug.
coffee cup. That one's not so fun. Oh, nice. Superman mug. Awesome. All right. Interesting topic today. So, kind of stemmed from the idea that we've did a kind of small rebrand of the show where it was a sales and marketing show, but I asked to change it. I asked that we change it to sales and RevOps. The main reason being that as the years go by, I've actually been doing a lot more operational stuff, and that's actually where my strength is. Yes, I do come from a marketing background, so I'll have marketing insights, but I've been doing operations really for the past, let's call it 10 years or whatnot, since I've been with using HubSpot. So I think it just only made sense to call the show sales and RevOps as opposed to sales and marketing, because we're actually talking, my contributions I feel are much more suited for operational stuff. And so Paul, you suggested that we talk about what is revenue operations. So this is it. This is a show. We're talking about revenue
Yes,
operations.
we're getting into it. So
Yeah.
Fab, what is revenue operations?
What a great question, Paul. It's almost like you were paying attention to the intro.
I was.
So revenue operations, I mean, there's a lot of different definitions out there, but revenue operations is really streamlining your revenue process. So in the same way that if you're in manufacturing, manufacturing processes have like Kaizen methodologies to improve and to optimize how manufacturing gets done. Or if you work with developers, you have an agile methodology to help improve how development and releases of the software get launched. Revenue operations is basically that same concept, but for anything that touches revenue, right? So traditionally marketing, sales, and customer service. Let's be clear. Companies have been doing revenue operations forever, right? Like everybody tries to optimize, whether it's with a professional like yourself, like their sales process, or they're trying to do it in-house, they're trying to improve gaps in the system, trying to generate more leads or whatnot. But I think where this idea of building in a revenue operations or RevOps capability comes from the fact that we now have access to the data that helps us improve our process, right? It used to be that marketing used to live here. Maybe they had HubSpot, maybe they had MailChimp. Then sales were here and they had Pipedrive or maybe Salesforce. And then customer service was all doing their other thing, maybe on a Zendesk or stuff like that. And it was really hard to get all that data together. So yes, you can improve what sales was doing, let's say hiring somebody like you and building a sales process, but it was still disconnected from the rest of the revenue team. But now that as tools better integrate, or even if HubSpot, shameless plug, like has like a full cycle, right? Like you can manage your marketing, your sales, and your customer service directly within the platform. You have
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. While we wait for HubSpot to sponsor the show, we'll do that. Just kidding. But basically, you now actually have access to the data to actually improve the process, right? And to track, how quickly leads are converting, and so on and so on and so forth.
I have a question, Fab.
Yes.
So you talked about all the different factors, whether it's marketing or outbound emails or your sales process. I have a vision of how that tree works, right?
Right.
How do you see that tree? Because what I see is like revenue operations, sort of, that's the key word on top, and then all these things come underneath it. So your process, your sales process that lives in there, that's in your CRM, that is tied into your sales methodology, that is tied into the marketing, the outbound, the inbound. They all live under Rev operations, and you're right that companies like HubSpot and there's other companies out there can sort of normalize all of that. But like we're talking about this today because for me, from my perspective as a salesperson, what I find interesting is that most companies I speak to, when you say the word CRM, it's still sort of clunky. It's not properly used. It's seen more as a pain in the ass to the salespeople than it is seen as a tool that can really help them move forward, right?
Mhm.
And even at the executive level, sometimes even the marketing people saying, well, we're doing this, and so in an ideal world, you're right, the revenue operations encompasses all that and it works together. But my interest today in talking to you is, why do you think with all the great tools that we have now that it's still broken? I have an opinion, but I want to hear yours first. Why is that still sort of broken? Why are these people having such a hard time normalize all these things and putting it together? Because I mean, that's why you and I have a job a lot of the times. Like, this is not working. Help us make it work, right?
Yeah.
I'll give you my opinion, but I want to hear yours first.
I don't know that there's one specific reason. I think different companies have different reasons. Things that I have seen, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
When things are working, right? Sales are coming in, so we don't really put a lot of emphasis on updating the CRM, right? Jonathan is crushing the sales, like Sylvie is crushing the sales. That's what we care about. So that's one reason. Two, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of tools. Sometimes, like we get a CRM because we need a CRM, but it's not really understood what the tool is for. And three, I think, which maybe is the underlying reason. I think ultimately there's this idea that kind of superstars run the show, right? You want your superstar salesperson or people, you want your superstar marketers. And, whenever we talk about superstar, we talk about black box, and things happen and leads come in and market sales close stuff and customer service does their thing. And so they're not realizing that there's actually now the possibility to optimize all that. And you can actually be not dependent, but based on a process as opposed to these misguided ideas. That's my 2 cents.
And so that's very interesting. So let me talk to you about it from a philosophical level. This is why I think it's not always so well aligned, is that I think the CEO has one view and one desire to get out from the RevOps. He wants to be able to forecast so he can present to the board, or forecast so he can present to the investors. And if he's the owner, he wants to be able to forecast to see how things are going, and he wants an overview of what's going on. The marketing person sees it as, okay, we're doing these things in a marketing effort to support sales. Often sales and marketing are much more aligned. And then the sales leader says, well, for me, it's also a tool to make sure that my people are doing what they need to do to move forward. There's often playbooks in there. There's deal stages, and it becomes sort of an assistant to my salespeople. But often there's a discordance to the expectations of what is going to come from an organized RevOps a system and what it's delivering to the different people. So I think, to me, the first conversation that people should have when they're establishing a system that's going to encompass everything is, what are the expectations of the CEO, the owners, and what box should each of those different people be living in and bringing the information to, and what it serves for them and how it serves the other people, right? So traditionally, a lot of CRMs, when they first came on, like all the salespeople say, oh, it's just a way for the owner to know what I'm up to, and big brother, right? And then the system's got a lot better, and it's like, oh, wait a second, I can do phone calls from this thing. I can write emails from this thing. It tells me when I do my follow-ups. It's helping me at what stage I should be saying what. It's like I got these little videos that are helping me, to what I should be saying here. I can see the history of my deals, what I've won, what I've lost. Hey, this is actually a good tool, right? So, but it's a tough thing because it becomes complex because the CEO cares about results. He doesn't always care so much about actions. or some CEOs. Actually, most CEOs I speak to are much more on results than actions, but really the salespeople only control their actions,
Right.
And if they're good salespeople and they have a proper sales methodology, which can be learned, they're going to maximize the results, but they're still only
Right.
doing actions. So, the whole semantics of what you're expecting has a true, to me, effect on what it is you're getting. Let's call it the CRM, which is much more than the CRM, but like the CRM tool, which becomes a marketing tool, which becomes a communication tool, which becomes a lot more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first conversation a company needs to have is, we're using this tool. Yeah, of course I want to be able to forecast. I want to see what's going on, but I also want it to be a tool to the individuals who are using it.
And I think you touched on the point there is that, right, there's, because CEOs or co-founders or whoever are focused on results, which makes sense, right? That's their job, right? They have an overview of the company. Like, they don't care that you need 16 phone calls to make, whatever. Like, that's the sales leader's problem or the salesperson's problem or whatever. That's not what they care about. But in that, what happens is that now, because we're able to, because really sales, you're capping your sale. I mean, we've talked about this. You're capping your growth if you don't have a strong marketing initiative, and you're also capping your growth if you have a weak customer service process, right? Because or if sales are like selling to the wrong people and they end up churning or quitting or canceling contracts or whatever. So sure, the leader is looking for the result, but what's not fully understood yet or accepted yet is that you can actually, those results are actually dependent on a strong end-to-end process
Yeah,
of,
yeah,
from the day the company becomes aware of you, like your prospected company becomes aware of you, to the day the salespeople reach out to them, to the day they get onboarded, to the day they renew or upsell, or and so on and so forth. Like, there's a repeatable process there, and in the same way that you build a sales process, you need to have all these elements kind of flow together and attach together and be able to track everything, so that, and that links us back to another point of, we've talked a lot about how the world's changed, right? Leads are coming. It used to be that salespeople used to have to teach, the back in the day when there was no way of learning about a product other than to talking to sales, like, but now the sales role has changed, and that's where consultative selling has come in, and so on and so forth. But the source of revenue has also changed quite a bit, as more and more companies are opting towards or trying to get recurring revenue. The sale, that first sale, is really not as much your source of profit anymore as is the recurring part, right? So
and also it's changed the role of the salespeople, right? Because often the sales job is to open the door, get that first sale, and then you've got a lot of either inside sales or customer service people who are CSMs that are managing the continuation of that growth. So they're, in large companies, often the sales process is split up into different people managing the relationship as it goes along. So even more important to have, to be well organized in your revenue operations.
right, exactly. And so, like, in terms of who needs to care, I think every company needs to care. I think some companies, maybe are less impacted if you're, let's say, more of a one sale, right? Even like you or me, right? Like, we sell a project and that's it. And there's, maybe some renewal, maybe some ongoing stuff, but ultimately it's still project by project, and every project needs to get sold. But if you're having some sort of a recurring revenue model, you definitely need to worry or care a lot about your revenue operations. I think that's the big one. What do you think about that?
Let me stop you there a second. So I'm a solopreneur, right? As are
Yeah,
you. I use actually two CRMs because I like to sort of know how.
things are.
It's not logical to use two CRMs, but as someone who will suggest CRMs, I want to be able to really live both experiences so that I can tell people, what's going on. So, you know, as small companies grow, often it's an organic growth, right? So they just have a natural way of operating. And their revenue operations is sort of like, we didn't really think about it. Customer walks in or they called us in, we made the product for them and we sent it to them, right? And George, the owner, is really good at talking about the different things, and then okay, oh, that's really good, and then George, the owner, hires Paul, and Paul, becomes a good salesperson, and then George sort of says to him how it works, but there's no real defined plan, and then next thing you know, 10 years later, Paul's the chief revenue officer, and he's got 100 people reporting to them, and well, maybe before then, let's say, and he suddenly says, wow, we need to be much more organized in the way that we're, they have a CRM, but we need to be much more organized. And then they try to retroactively fit something, right? They try to say, well, we're going to just implement this and we're going to do it in a new way, right? Without taking into consideration the things that worked, that George used to do right from the start, or that Paul did from the start, that worked well. And I guess my question to you is, how much and how much do people really take the time to understand and realize how the company works before they build a revenue operation system? And what do you do about those freaking salespeople who are just naturals? They don't even know how they do stuff. They don't even know what the stages are. They just, well, I go out there, I talk to them, and it works. And they do all these things naturally. So how do you, as a RevOps person who's going in there when you're setting up a new system, how do you deal with that? Apart from calling a guy like me.
Yeah. I think first you have to look at what's been going on, right? Like, I mean, you were talking about specifically sales, but it's about the whole spectrum, right? Is your marketing feeding leads? Are they just doing random stuff? I think you need to like sit with your salespeople, because all of what you said is all subjective, right? Like the salesperson might think they're crushing it, but they're maybe not crushing it at all. Maybe they're just selling a product that sells itself, or maybe they could be doing 10 times more. They just better than their colleagues, and so on and so forth. So I think you need to kind of dive deeper and see what you can debunk, but see also what you can document, right? Maybe it's more of a documentation process, and then you can build it into your process, your process. Because what's going to be important with revenue operations is, and that's a mistake that a lot of people make when they're like on the operational side of things, and I've made that mistake too, is like you're very process driven, and you're really looking at optimizing that end-to-end process, and you're not taking into account adoption, right? And so if you have a sales team that's not very focused on entering data or logging their calls or whatnot, it's going to be very hard to deploy a full-on, like, okay, now you need to log the call, and this is the type of call, and this is the outcome of the call, and you need to do all that. But the sales leader is not willing to enforce it, and so on and so forth. So I think you also need to adapt to the reality of the company.
Most salespeople don't like filling out things. Like they don't like taking.
That's not true, because I've been working with. It's very much a leadership position.
Most
right?
old salespeople.
Well, that's why it's a sale. From what I've seen, the companies I've worked with, it's a sales leadership mentality. If the sales leader is like, you will do this, and I need this, and this is all our reporting and your commission evaluation and all that is all going to be based on the data that's in the CRM. And if you don't do it, you're just not a right fit for the team. I mean, and they do that. I think the challenge comes for there's just no accountability, right? Like the sales leader is like, whatever, John's crushing his sales. We're going to give him his target. I don't want him to quit because he's our best salesperson. So it's like, again, there's a sales culture or a company culture element that plays into that as well.
Yeah. And what do you do in this particular time, let's say in manufacturing, where sales are doing great? Maybe it's more a question to me, but I'll ask it to you anyways. Sales are doing great. They're doing fantastically well, but their RevOps sucks. But the numbers are coming in, and they're like, hey man, like, yeah, we have other fish to fry. We're working on supply chain and delivering. We don't have time to really bother ourselves with RevOps because the sales are there anyways.
Right. And I mean, to be fair, to be clear, fair and clear, it's RevOps, as a term is relatively new. And so a lot of companies don't have a fully documented or fully executed RevOps group or person or individual. So I think there is still a minority of companies that are kind of trying to optimize the revenue process. And I think, yes, but then to be clear is like, revenue operations, and obviously it'll change from company to company. When I was saying you have to take into account the realities of the company, can encompass everything. I've seen revenue operations who they're the ones who take care of sales compensation, right? Because the sales leader is just not in the right position to be able to do it. Because how many times have you seen sales compensation plans that don't adequately reinforce the company's strategy, right? You're like, we need to sell product B, but product A gives you the most commission. Well, guess who's optimizing? Guess who's going to get sold more? And so I think your revenue operations. So if supply chain is that's a RevOps functionality as well. If that makes sense for your company, to how is my supply chain impacting my revenue? How can we adapt the process, adapt our sales, adapt our marketing to take into account? How can we get new suppliers? Like, it's all part of revenue operations. And the complexity of your revenue operations team, let's say, very dependent on who your company is, what internal strengths you have. If you have a very senior buying team, like, some of those might be part of the revenue operations team to help improve that process, right? Like,
it's very true. And I like what you said. You said two things. Well, you said a lot of things, but you talk about supply chain or anything else that the sales will affect, you have to include that in RevOps. And when you talk, that's number one, and that's very, very true. You need to look outside of just the sales world, but how it affects the rest of the operations and how those operations affect your sales. Mm-hmm. And your revenue operations system should take that into consideration. So that's one. And two, you said something earlier that was really interesting about, and I think this goes for any department, if you have a process that is hard to adopt by the individuals that should be using it, well, you're setting yourself up for failure. Right. So you need to, so when you're saying that, okay, you're being hired, this is what you're going to be doing, well, you got to make sure that you're hiring the right people that are capable of doing the accountability factor of what you require of them in the whole revenue operation system. So really what we're saying, Fab, is that RevOps really touches everything. It touches operations, it touches the whole company, and it's tied in and webbed into everything. So that really, like people were saying to me 10, 15, 20 years ago, I was very young back then, that without the accountants, you can't sell. Without the guy on the floor, you can't sell. Without the driver, you can't sell. Without the receptionist, you can't sell. Without the CEO, you can't sell. It's all true. And they can't do accounting without the salespeople selling. So, right. Salespeople often saw themselves as the most important part of the company. They're important, but, without a product, you got nothing to sell. Without a service, you got nothing to sell. So, and I think what the RevOps does is it brings all of that together in a software or a system that is readily accessible for you to do your part in, as from whichever department you're in, to ensure that that machine is fluid. So your responsibility, the actions you need to do in your work. So it's sort of like a beehive, right? Which bee are you? Are you the queen bee? Are you the worker bee? Are you the, I don't know what the bees are, but anyways, are you the honey bee? So, and you're part of that ecosystem. So really what revenue operations is to make sure that you properly tie in your duty in sales and marketing, whatever, to properly gear into the rest of the company and how that all functions together. And you're mapping it out. What used to be more instinctive now is much more fluid, and you can see what's going on in the whole company and how it affects each other, and you can have more. You can make decisions based on the data that you're collecting and you're analyzing to see how to move forward.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, and you said something interesting, which was like, oh, sales used to see themselves as like the focal one. And it used to be more true, right? As marketing was less sophisticated, as, customer service was more a matter of just like executing orders or just answering complaints or whatnot. But like we said at the top of the show, is like things have changed, right? Like people know more about what the products they want, people are the services they want, people know more about your competitors, know more about what's available out there. They spend a lot more time analyzing what their situation is. And the reality is, take the B2C world, right? The Amazons and all that of this world has also changed expectations on the B2C or B2B level, right? If to get in touch with you, I need to go to your website, fill out a form, maybe get a call back from a salesperson 3 days later, there's a disconnect between my reality as a consumer on a personal level and a reality as a consumer on a business level. And you need to be more efficient and be able to address simplicities that are out there as well.
Yep, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's fascinating. So, I mean, we've talked about RevOps at a very high level. I mean, in the future, what we'll probably boil down to is talk about different aspects of the RevOps. And I think, there's something here I just want to look at. Hold on. There's a question we'd written to each other.
Yeah.
Well, I think we addressed why we should. So we wrote these down, so we'll make sure we cover them. So I think we addressed why we should care about RevOps.
Yeah.
I
the
think
only way to grow and to optimize the revenue is by looking at it as a holistic level.
Well, who needs to care about everybody?
Right.
In the organization, because really it's part, right? It's part of accounting, it's part of delivery, it's part of marketing, it's part of inbound, outbound, it's part of sales. It's not just the salespeople. You're right.
Right.
So let me ask you one thing, Fab. Let's say I'm a small company, I'm starting out, and I'm thinking of putting in a system. How should I go about to decide what system I should be using? Like, what are the steps that I need to do?
And you're talking about a system like a RevOps system, not like a software. Okay. Yeah, like I said, I think step one is documenting what's going on. I think the RevOps is ultimately based off of process and identifying pain points, right, within your process.
Yeah.
In a lot of the same way that you would sit with when you're starting to build a sales process, kind of sit with your individual salespeople, see how they sell. You have this idea of how consultative selling should work, but ultimately you want to adapt it to their reality. I think you need to do it the same way. And what's marketing doing? If marketing is still quote unquote just sending, well, we don't have many trade shows going on now, but sending booths to the trade show or sending out paper catalogs, like I think, okay, that's definitely a pain point that we'll need to address. And then
unless it works for them.
What's that, sorry?
Unless it works for them.
But they don't know, right? Because they're just doing it because they're doing it, right? Because it's and then like looking at your salespeople, how are they selling? Where are they getting leads from? Like why is Julie doing so well and Bob's is kind of struggling? What are they doing differently, and so on and so forth? And then maybe you're realizing that they're both selling as much, as just Bob is selling product B, and product your developers, let's say it's a software, or your manufacturing isn't set up to deliver B properly, right? And it's an old product that you didn't want to use you want to sell anymore. And so it's just, you just need to look at everything holistically. You're a small company, things will change. You don't need to have like a 350-page process document that outlines every little detail, but you need to have these clear ideas of what's happening, and then you need to build it out in a CRM, right? Like your end-to-end CRM.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually needs to go in CRM. But what I like is, and I totally agree with you, and you said it, document it first as to how it's happening now and what you think is important. And I'm using your words here, identify the pain points, right?
Right.
Because ideally, your RevOps, you're trying to streamline, and like you said earlier, you're trying to create a process and a bunch of different processes that make sense, right? That are related to you're documenting reality to help you find the pain points, and then eventually that'll live in your RevOps system, which will be, well, let's call it a CRM, and
Which will be HubSpot.
that
Which will be HubSpot.
which, oh my god, shameless plug too.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And as you grow, you can iterate and become more sophisticated. And obviously, like large companies with large, sales teams and large marketing teams and large, support and service teams and large manufacturing teams, that system gets quite complex. And there's a lot of interchanging tools. And I mentioned the tools just as like one of the last elements, is because these tools are increasingly important, right? It used to be that sales can go and do their thing and find like the CRM that works for them, and like manufacturing would go or accounting would go, and everybody would find all these tools that work for them. But then what happens is they don't speak to each other, right? So then at the end of the month, or when you're doing your forecast, sales coming in like, hey, we're forecasting like 3 million this month, and accounting's like, and we're only at 250,000. Like, where's this? And then like marketing is like, hey, we generated 65 qualified leads this month, and sales is like, we only got 3. And and so the tools you choose are increasingly important because they help you. You can't optimize if nobody's speaking the same language, right? If marketing is saying 67 and your sales is saying 3, and sales is saying 3 million, and accounting is saying 250,000, there's nothing to optimize there, right? There's too many blind spots. So the tools that you use, probably one of the lower rungs in the RevOps process, but still important, is the tools that you use to help support that along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been super interesting. Now you understand why we changed the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
I guess the last thing I'd like to close on, and I want to be really honest here, as a coming from the sales world, it's always been painful for most salespeople to create a process or to write down a process. And what I'll say to most salespeople and most sales organizations is, even though it might be painful at first to look at it, do it, because you will benefit from it. You'll benefit from it, from mapping out what it is you do well, because then you'll be able to do more of what you do well and less of what you don't do so well, to really simplify it. But I think this goes for any process in the system. The other thing I'd like to say too is, coming from the advertising world, used to be, what is it? I know that 50% of my ads work. I just don't know which ones. Well, now with the RevOps system and access to data, you can know a hell of a lot more what is specifically working.
Yeah.
Tie that into the conversation that your people are having face to face, and we're saying two things here. We're saying, understand your process, and then what's great is there are tools out there, shameless plug 3, that will permit you to integrate those processes, your processes, not theirs, your processes, to make it work best for your company.
Exactly. And ultimately, you're trying to remove friction for your customer, because your customer is less and less willing to tolerate those friction points, right? I mean, sure, some industries are probably less impacted, some more, right? If you're a tech startup who's just gotten like a whole round of investing and you're trying to go up against a massive player in the space, like your customers are much more sensitive to friction points. Whereas if you're an established manufacturing companies and you're one of the only ones who offers this, you're probably less impacted. People will tolerate a lot more. But ultimately, you're trying to reduce those friction points with your customers. And that's really the ultimate goal of RevOps, is to reduce friction points so that you can increase revenue, whether that's increasing revenue because sales and marketing and service are well aligned and we know what the right customer is, we know how to market, we know how to sell, we know how to service, or whether that means, we can spend less and less time on each account, therefore increasing our profit as years go by with one existing account on a recurring revenue system.
And you're also reducing friction internally too, right?
Right.
And if you don't map out the process, you might still keep doing, to use your words, the same pain points you have in the past, because you're marketing is saying this, sales saying that, operations saying this, and like no one ever connects. So it's going to reduce friction for everyone. But I think you need to reduce friction internally before you can reduce friction externally.
Well, usually that's where friction comes from, right? It's an internal thing where sales is like, no man, now we need to place like an internal purchase order, and it's a 16-page document, and man, this takes forever, and I hate doing this, and so I put it off, and so you make the sale, but the reality is like, manufacturing only gets the go ahead like 6 days later or something to that effect. But that's an internal friction that impacts the customer, right? So a lot of frictions are usually internal,
Yeah. Yeah.
with external impact.
Yep. I agree. So
Awesome.
are we saying anything else? What's your
I
closing comment? I gave my closing comment like 5 minutes ago.
My closing comment is don't neglect revenue operations. It's a new thing. It might sound buzzwordy, but it's a new thing on the market. It's not, you've been doing it, do it. It's not because you're small that you can't take time to document. It doesn't need to be a 655-page document. It could just be a one-pager. It could be a flow chart. It could be anything, but start documenting how things are happening so that you can make sure you're maximizing your 3 pillars of revenue.
Oh, what are the 3 pillars?
Marketing, sales, service.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye, Paul.
See you later.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.